The next one deals with incorrect information in the MLS, and asking about agents owing due diligence to the seller and to each other to have correct information. Do you have any reflections on that or answers for us?
Yeah, I think this could be one of two things. Either the information they received from the seller wasn't correct, or the information that they actually put in was incorrect. So as far as the seller goes, the listing contract, there's a sentence in there that says, "It is understood that the broker may rely on the validity of the data pertaining to this listing contract which has been provided by seller." And again, further down, "Seller acknowledges that the information on the seller's residential real estate sales disclosure form, if applicable, and the information provided for the listing is true and correct." So that information that you receive from the seller's making a comment saying that they agree it's correct. But once you input it into the MLS, you really need to get that back to the seller and say, is this all correct? And we have had some situations where it wasn't the information from the seller that was incorrect, but it was unfortunately a mistake made by the broker or whoever put the information into the MLS, in which case there could be some liability issues down the road. And I think almost all MLSs may have some language on there about it's not guaranteed, it's guaranteed, but not, reliable but not guaranteed. So that would be on there for the protection of brokers who may have made a mistake in inputting the data.
Okay. Well, the next one, simple little statement, pocket listing sales, hot topic, here we go.
Those are a few words for a very big topic, pocket listing / sales. Let me just cover the basics on this. They're not illegal, okay? You can have off MLS listings, you can have pocket sales, you know, seller can decide they don't want to be in the MLS. It is not illegal as long as you follow three things. You have to follow state law. Indiana requires written authorization by the seller to market or advertise the property. So you have to make sure you have that written authorization by the seller. You also then have to, with the code of ethics, you've got to make sure you're not violating Article 1 or Article 3. If you're keeping it off the MLS, you need to make sure, pocket listing or off MLS, that your seller knows they may not receive the most exposure to that property. Is that an Article 1 violation? Are you representing the best interests of your seller or yourself? That's a big question. Could be an Article 1 violation in many, many instances. Article 3, cooperation, doesn't mean you have to pay realtor money, but you have to make the house available for showing. So you could have an Article 3 violation if you're not allowing that property to be shown or only having it be shown to certain people. Again, make sure your buyer is very aware of, the seller is aware of these issues so that you don't have any type of liability as a realtor. The last is the MLS. You've got guidelines that your MLS requires. You have to have a property in the MLS unless you sign probably an exempt form or a waiver form. I'm guessing they're different with different MLSs. You call it exempt or waiver? Exemption. So again, if you've got a pocket listing or an off MLS, make sure that you have complied with the MLS rules and regs in your locale. Okay.
I mean, all kinds of questions in my head based on what you said. Well, just to clarify, so if I have that pocket listing and the seller signed the form saying that they understand that they might not get as much for the property and they don't want me to market it, then I'm not allowed to market it. I can't put a sign out there. I can't put it on Facebook, on Twitter, on whatever. I mean, it's really a pocket listing.
You really do have to follow what the seller mandates you do. All you can do is try to talk to that seller and say, you know, this doesn't work to your best, benefit. This isn't in your best interest. So you could try to talk the seller out of no marketing, no exposure. I don't think we see that very often. Most sellers want the most exposure, want their house sold within days. So that's not a common issue that we've seen come up.
Yeah, I will add though, when we have seen it come up, we've been very concerned for the broker for issues that they may have some complaints against them. Sometimes brokers, or I've heard of brokers who have withheld a listing for a few weeks, so just the people in their own office can show it during that time. They don't allow anyone else to show it during that time. So if that's not done correctly, that could really be some liability issues for those brokers.
Okay, thank you. After a home inspection, what is the responsibility of the seller as far as disclosing items from the home inspection report if that deal falls through and a new buyer comes along? My concern is that though they are a licensed inspector, they do a lot of covering their rears, appears to have licensed HVAC, electrician, plumber to evaluate and repair as needed. They are not licensed in the above fields. That person has to give $5 or back, whoever, right? No. How do we know that the reported issues are really issues? It's a complicated question.
Yeah, it's complicated. I'm not sure if I'm going to answer it the way it's down here or not. But yes, a lot of times it happens. There's a home inspection done, and then the transaction falls through, and the seller has this inspection that was given to them by a buyer asking for repairs. As far as things that they need to still disclose, if something showed up on an inspection done by a home inspector that there was a defect, I would say seller now has the awareness of a defect, and the next time, if they don't take care of that, remedy that defect, they'll need to disclose it to future buyers. The only exception to that would be there are a lot of times sellers just refuse to believe that there's any defect, and they may have their own licensed person come out. And if that person is unbiased and properly licensed, and they give them the opinion that no, this isn't a defect after all, then what we have is two experts saying two different things, and that would be the only situation I would say where a seller may not need to continue to disclose that if they have some reliable, qualified person that tells them it's really not a defect. The other thing about that though is I get questions a lot about sharing the inspection reports. Can the seller share the inspection report with the next buyer? And they have to, in order to do that, they have to have the approval of the buyer who did pay for it, purchase it. But then secondly, we don't even recommend that because that would come off to a buyer as maybe a warranty, kind of like a representation by the seller, like, here's this inspection report, and I can tell you that there's nothing else wrong with it other than what you see in here. And that could in fact turn out not to be true. So we don't recommend it, even if you do have the approval of the previous buyer who purchased it. So.
Okay, we're down to the last question. You represent the seller, and by mistake you send back page 8 of the purchase agreement as accepted, instead of sending back a counter. What is the position of the seller now? Can the seller rescind within 24 hours? Is this technically void due to there is not a meeting of the minds?
If this happens, call Frank. There is no meeting of the minds here, but it depends on the fact situation. If you accidentally check accept and you send back a counter, obviously it's clear there was a scrivener's error, that there was a mistake. That would not be a meeting of the minds, and I believe that you would be able as a seller to back out of that and say, hey, here's my counter. Obviously, I accidentally marked accepted. If you marked accepted and sent it back with nothing else, no counter, then it's a binding deal. I mean, we don't know what the seller was thinking. They could say later, oh, that was an error. So you would probably have a binding contract if there was nothing else sent back but an acceptance. Okay, and again, you want to try to work these things out. If something happened and you accidentally marked the wrong box, hopefully you could work that out with the other side.
Well, we are through our list of questions. If you could help me with a round of applause to say thank you to these ladies for answering our questions.